Welcome to Read Poems Every Day. Today I'd like to wrap up my notes on Felix's poem Dearly Departed. Again, I dreamt about a ship. I've already recorded some notes on reading aloud, counting beans, listening for sound and sense, describing form and figures, and I started inching my way into sketching or shaping ideas and questions. So maybe we'll go back there. Often when I transition into shaping ideas and questions, I kind of look back at my previous notes and I think about and reflect on my experience of the poem thus far. And maybe I've already sort of noted that I have a question about the speaker's ambivalence with respect to the shift happening in their life. And that ambivalence we can find very near the end of the poem, the final three lines. What I love, not the departed, what I love is a heaven that vexes me. And that vexation, to vex, remember, is to feel annoyed, frustrated, right? What I love is a heaven that vexes me. And to that heaven, I must become a faithful wife. That discourse of matrimony really hits me out of left field. That's my right hand, but maybe the left side of your screen. It hits me out of left field, and I'm not entirely sure why. And I wonder if it's because it feels like a kind of, I don't know, an overcoding of the kind of shift that's happening in this speaker's life. And that code is one that I tend to associate with, to be honest, the norm, right? What sort of relationship to that heaven is the speaker thinking about there? Um, and maybe that sort of jarring feeling is precisely what the speaker wants, precisely what the poem wants from us. That it's tapping into a logic of fidelity, um, of sort of unquestioned fidelity that normatively we tend to associate with marriage, with monogamy. And yet, of course, as many of you may know, right, monogamy is not always lifelong. And sometimes one leaves a lifelong commitment to enter into another one, and one that feels truer, that feels more authentic. And so we pass from, fidelity to fidelity across a sort of gap of infidelity, right? But I don't necessarily know if that's what the poem is tapping into there or not. And maybe I'm projecting a little bit onto onto that final line. Maybe I am supposed to read that final line with a kind of positivity. And yet, I don't know. The poem does signal to us this ambivalence. Okay. Maybe and because of that, maybe we go back through and think about where does that ambivalence get, I hesitate to say foreshadowed, but where does it get foreshadowed or prefigured in the poem, right? Where does this ambivalence get prefigured, foreshadowed, right? So there's a way in which it may be foreshadowed right away in the title. In the title, with the reference to again. After all, this is not the first dream about a ship, apparently. And it may be, as later lines in the poem suggest, not the first time that this voice is speaking from the ship. It's as if we could say, I dreamt again about a ship, and then we rewind to the first time that the speaker had dreamed about that ship and dreamed about a voice speaking from the ship. And then we get a sense of years passing, right? And so it's not as if the speaker hears this voice and then everything changes, but rather there is a pattern of dreaming about this ship, a pattern of dreaming about a ship with a voice, with a mouth speaking from it. Something changes after that initial speaking, and yet, as the speaker says, of the speaker of the poem says, for years that strange whistle of new language nettled me sloppily. What does nettled mean? Nettled me, irritated me, right? Irritated me, and why sloppily? That's such an interesting adverb to attach to nettled. I don't know. And then a sense that it had hollered too long untended. One thing I might not have noticed thus far is that the dream is a repetition. That this is not a one-time encounter. Years pass, too many years, right? And that too many years is signaled by the too long of the poem, right? I took too long to know its nature, and now I count a debt. As if something had been requested, a calling had been delivered, and one had wasted time not answering that call, right? And now you've wasted years of your life. And now you have to make up that debt. Is that what the poem is kind of talking about? Does that add to the urgency, right? Does that add to the urgency? Hmm. Too long untended, and after too long in ignorance, because it took too long to know, it came back to me a bullet of tenacity. Tenacity here, you can notice I've noticed the dictionary function of Google Chrome here. The tenacity, the quality or fact of being able to grip something firmly, right? But that's a contrasting image, right? A bullet of tenacity. I don't tend to think of a grip as a bullet, right? Um, but what do a grip and a bullet have in common? A kind of suddenness, a sense of impact, right? Of being stopped in your tracks. And so I wonder if the contrast is actually an amplifying contrast of a kind of suddenness, right? That after too long of not heeding the call, of not seeking to understand this call, of ignoring it, of finding it annoying, that just kind of amplifies the moment of when it actually lands and when the speaker actually understands it. I wonder, has something happened like this in your life where for years and years and years you had an idea, right, of how your life should be going and it's not going that way? But for years and years and years, it was just kind of a nagging feeling that things should be different, right? And then there came a moment of clarity that life could be different, which brings with it a kind of grief that it could have been different all along. Had you just bothered to stop and think and answer the call? I don't know. I don't know. Um, hmm. But yeah, we have some interesting, yeah. What do we make of the patchwork of images here? Right. We get a cluster of speech discourse, right? The voice from the ship, the speaking that warrants a kind of listening, right? The strange whistle, a new language. This is all imagery, ways of talking that are related to a discourse or about speech and listening, right? About orality, so to speak. But then we shift into a strange, but then a spatial language of mapping. And then a language of violence. We have the bullet, we have the blade, a language of vegetation, also a language of nourishment and care, also a sensuous language, and a language of need and desire, right? All kind of layered onto each other, arranged and organized with each other. And here, of course, I'm thinking about the sense of the mother warbler feeding the speaker melons by the whole, and the questions about the hungry mouth and the width of its reception, right? Um, and the syrup and the blade and the garden, right? But what about and then this, right? But then language of duty, of matrimony, of fidelity, right? Which I sort of started talking about with reference to that final line. How do we get there? How do we get there? But also of machines, of the norm, of pre programmed or ready made ways of living, right? That's the, sense of the escape from cogwheel mandates, right? Which for some reason is different from this discourse of a fidelity to a new heaven to which one needs to become a faithful wife, and this is deeply related to a religious way of speaking, in the Christian tradition, or the way of speaking about the church as the bride of Christ, for instance, or Christians as collective members of a bride to Christ who must be faithful to their uh, divine husband, so to speak, to which their baptism sort of weds them. I might be mixing metaphors here and might be getting some of that theology wrong, but hopefully, those who know anything about that will recognize what I'm trying to say here. Um, got my little cat Casimir up here right now. He hasn't been very well lately, so it's very sweet that he's up here. I don't think I can catch him on camera. I'd scoop him right up, but he's not feeling too great. Hi. You can lay down if you want, Mr. Boy. Okay. But then, yeah, I mean that sense of the divine here also. Um, of he's gonna lay right on a chord. There we go. Of religious language, right? Of the religious language, divine, heaven, bride. These are all sort of spoken in a kind of religious register of a kind of a conversion experience, which I think I've already spoken about in a previous video. One problem with taking a few days between videos is I forget what I've maybe rambled on about, although I don't really see anything in here about religious conversion. Maybe that was just something I rambled about out loud but didn't note in my scratching here. Okay. By the way, perspicuity, I looked up. It is not what I thought it meant. Clearly expressed and easily understood. Lucid, that's a good synonym, a nice clear synonym. And so what we have here is a bit of irony. And so for this wily bewitched reason of little perspicuity, meaning meaning this reason that is not at all clear, this reason that is deeply obscure. Um, Deeply obscure partly because it's being expressed not just as a letter, but as a letter that is also simultaneously a lyric poem. Okay. I hope these make sense. Ideas and questions. What do we make of all this, right? And then I think it's worth noting, line 22, again, the line of questions, line of questions, the line of questioning. If you heard some collapsing in the background, that was Casimir jumping off the desk. I have boxes set up for him. Don't worry. He has some stepping stones to get off the desk. Is there a mouth as hungry as mine, as wide in its receiving? There's something interesting here. I mean, is there something about lyric poetry? Is there something about lyric poetry that seems to necessitate the speaker emphasizing their plight as special? Is there hyperbole in the arrangement of a situation that requires lyric amplification? And to be clear, I don't mean anything offensive by this. I think this is the case with Keats, it's the case with Shakespeare's sonnets, and it's the case here that the person driven to write the poem, the speaker of a lyric poem driven to poeticize their situation and their plight, to amplify it up to a potentially general situation. This might have something to do with the affect of shame or embarrassment that theorists like Jonathan Culler, although Culler might be responding to the theorists um, who first think this through, the kinds of affects that are sometimes associated with poetry and with lyric poetry. And yet, there's not really shame here, right? There's not shame here or embarrassment. I read these questions as rhetorical questions, bold questions that maybe don't assume, but challenge us to think as readers. No, no. Or invite us to stand in them and be the speakers of the questions. That, like the speaker of this question, I too have a mouth that's hungrier than everybody else's, right? Who deeply desires a different kind of nourishment, a different kind of life, right? And this again is the kind of magic of poetry. The speaker stands out as special, and yet any reader can step not just into the role of auditor, the listener, the person being addressed, but into the role of the speaker, which is also an affordance of the letter, which, as the About section tells us, is the model of the poem's form. Okay. I didn't take any of the notes with respect to what I was saying there, but I hope it made sense. Okay. So those are some ideas, some questions. Maybe the last idea, if there is ambivalence here, a sense of a shift happening too late or later than would have been ideal, is the shift worth it? What food for thought does the poem leave us with? Is there, following the about this poem note, resistance to a certain kind of political practice, activity, order? And what's the alternative offered by the mouth practiced, maybe, by the new way of listening, practiced or trained. All right. Contexts. I'm probably so predictable at this point with respect to the contexts that matter to me. Hmm. Scholars of contemporary, um, American poetry, um, Black poetics. Now, while the speaker's self-situating as a Black poet, as someone operating within a tradition of Black poetics, Black poetry, while that might not be explicit here, if you spend some time, if you spend some time reading Felix's other poetry, reading Felix's new book, it does seem to me that matters for how she is approaching and thinking about her craft, her politics, and what she thinks about poetry. So some of that is coming from the world section here. Um, hmm, what else? I don't know. I think people, maybe this is more for the concept section. People working in new formalism might be particularly significant here. How do we think about the poem's engagement with the letter? Right, its adoption of the letter as a form, but also exceeding that form, right? Taking what it needs, but also infusing it with the affordances of lyric poetry. But yeah, so readers, I want to think, also maybe, I've been thinking of either starting or joining, if one is on offer, a reading group in contemporary poetry. And by that, I don't mean people who want to share their own poetry. There's lots of venues for that, I hope, for people who are interested in that kind of thing. But what about people who want to just get together to talk about poetry? It seems like that's not quite on offer, uh, at least as readily as those who are um, sharing their own work. But I would be curious what other people think about some of the questions I've been asking, and what you think about some of the questions I've been asking with respect to this poem and some of the notes I've been taking. Um, so self-culture, political activism, right? That this seems to be coming from a place, at least if we follow the note here attached, of someone frustrated by the life of the political activist who's now sort of pursuing a different kind of work, one that may still be activated or motivated by politics, but not by strategy per se, not by a kind of careerism that's often associated with politics. Maybe careerism. Um, might think of Black studies here as something else, and Black studies will be something that cuts across both the readership, scholars working in that field of Black poetics, that sense of it as both shaping and undoing identity at the same time, but also being a field that provides concepts with which to understand, uh, concepts that might teach us how to better understand what the poem might be up to. Self culture. What else? I mean, there is throughout, maybe, hmm, maybe gender studies, feminist studies might also have something to teach us, right? The poem has an interesting pattern of kind of gendered imagery throughout as well that I guess I haven't really asked many questions about that could probably be of some interest. And there, as these categories tend to, there's some overlapping here. Feminist theory, gender studies as well. Maybe some eco criticism too, with respect to that shift to natural imagery. You might wonder about that. I mean, we have the crows, we have the warbler, so bird imagery that I hadn't actually tracked before, the melons, the syrup, again, which is definitely giving Christina Rossetti Goblin Market vibes. And then that sense of the blade of a garden in the small of my back. That's such a strange image. And I still have questions. I think I had thought I had solved it, but this line, and want for nothing more than, that is so different than saying, and want nothing more than. And I wonder to what degree the poem is aware of that difference. I'm sure it is, because it then cuts kind of in two directions, right? And now I'm getting yelled at by the other cat. At least I thought I was. That probably didn't get picked up on the mic, but a very loud meow from Lila from the doorway. I do want to think more about this because it does cut in two directions. Because to want nothing more than is to express desire. This is what I want, right? You're basically saying this is what I want. To say I want for nothing more than, maybe that is saying the same thing. To want for human connection, for instance, is to say I want human connection. Oh no, maybe it's not. Because that's usually said in that he does not want for. It's usually in the negative articulation that he does not want for. Oh boy. I don't know. This is tripping me up though. Okay. Back to the world. Felix's other poetry, and of course, the new book is one that I also think, which I mentioned in the first video about Felix, Camonghne Felix, which I'm reading. I'm gonna disappear for a second just because I actually have it here. Let the poets govern, just to prove. Look, I got my receipts. I'm reading it. So Felix's new book. Um, More about the history she she tells there, and the way poetry affords a bridging of that history with memoir and with a theoretical, critical, creative ambition. That creative ambition is often manifested at the ends of chapters, at least the early chapters, with a kind of blackout poetry, taking a historical document and through the method of redaction, of blacking out, of retooling it, of sabotaging it to other kinds of creative, political ends, ethical ends. All right. Well, boy, I have been going on a while. Did not mean to do that. That is usually how things go, isn't it? Let's post this. Let's read the poem one more time. We'll see if anything occurs to us, and if not, that's okay. We'll at least have heard it one more time, and then we'll wind things down today. So here, one more time. Is there ever a last time? Dearly departed, again I dreamt about a ship, by Camonghne Felix. When a mouth aboard said ship called out to me, I was a berry turned sour by sun's neglect, an old ornament gone unglossed. It spoke to me and warranted a new way of listening, and at once I heard two crows, heard both. That was also an interesting way. I heard two crows, comma, and then the re-emphasis, heard both. For years, that strange whistle of new language nettled me sloppily, its orientation unmapped. I let it holler too long untended. And after too long in ignorance, it came back to me, a bullet of tenacity. So that bullet is the sense of trajectory, maybe? Of ricochet? Of a speeding back, maybe? Of having passed you by, but then looped back, maybe? Anyway, it took too long to know its nature, and now I count a debt. It takes exactly this much effort to tell you that I have been stayed, that you, at the end of a line, the first time it's mentioned, stayed by a new forgetfulness, stayed by an urgent condition, a mother warbler feeding me melons by the whole. Is there a mouth as hungry as mine, as wide in its receiving? I open to a 30th orbit, and want for nothing more than the syrup of fruit, than the blade of a garden in the small of my back, than to bait the braid of duty. Still a baffling image to me. If it is clear to you, I'd love if you posted in the comments what you think those lines mean to you. That would be wonderful. I'd love to learn from you how that hits you. And so, for this wily bewitched reason of little perspicuity, I regret to inform you of my imminent departure, my eventual divine escape from cogwheel mandates, my prescriptions grown old. So we have a shift to a kind of medicalized discourse here. So we can add that to the kind of discourses that the poem brings together, right? To try to explain uh, this shift in the speaker's life. What I love is a heaven that vexes me, and to it I must become a faithful wife. Anyway, apologies for the interruptions, but I think that's how we might have to do this again section. Just as I read it, what occurs to me that maybe hadn't occurred to me, or something that still, as it were, vexes me. All right, so that's Camonghne Felix, a full set of, not a full set, not a complete set. There's never a complete set of notes about any text, any poem, but lots of notes about this incredible poem by an incredible poet, important contemporary writer, contemporary to me at least, and to you. And thanks for spending some time with her, with me, with this poem. And whether or not I record a video tomorrow, uh, I hope you read some poems. So let's recommit to the principle and read more poems tomorrow.